So, dear listeners, we would like to warmly welcome you to the Book of the Month session. My name is Adrian Matus. I am the editor of the Democracy and Culture series at the Review of Democracy. This series of events, dear listeners, we would like to warmly co-organized by the CEU Review of Books and Review of Democracy, aims to promote books that provide fresh insights about the cultural landscape in which we live. Throughout these sessions, our aim is to bring together authors, scholars, and editors to foster interesting debates. Our first session will present the essay collection Invisible University for Ukraine, Essays on Democracy at War, edited by Ostap Sereda, Balázs Trencényi, Tetiana Zemliakova, and Guillaume Lancereau, and published by the Cornell University Press in 2024. Let me briefly walk you through today's structure. In the upcoming hour or so, 4 guests will share their opinion about the book. Indeed, it's a longer story which will unfold itself in 4 parts. First, Ostap Sereda, Associate Professor of History at the Ukrainian Catholic University, will explain the meaning of IUFU, or Invisible University for Ukraine, and the awards that validated this unique educational framework. Unfortunately, due to a healthcare problem, I will read aloud his message. Then, Tetiana Zemliakova, the lead researcher at the History Work Group, will share the process of writing this important book. After the interventions of Ostap and Tetiana, it's the turn of the respondents, Natalie Nugered and Jan Kubik. Natalie Nugered is an advisor to civil society organizations and affiliated with Index Lviv. At the same time, Natalie was a former editorial board member at The Guardian and former editor-in-chief at Le Monde. Jan Kubik is a distinguished professor at the Department of Political Sciences at Rutgers and a professor emeritus at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at the UCL. Before we start, I would like to mention an important point. We would like to kindly ask the YouTube audience to put the questions in the live stream chat. After the authors respond to the moderators and respondents' comments, we will gather the questions and ask the authors. Now, first, I will start with the intervention of Professor Ostap Sereda, which unfortunately is not here today due to a health issue. And I will read his words. Dear all, I apologize that due to the illness, I cannot participate today in this wonderful book talk. This collection resulted from the informal seminar on democracy at war, initiated and led by Tetiana Zemliakova and Guillaume Lancereau. The seminar gathered the core group of the students and mentors of the Invisible University for Ukraine, a program initiated in March 2022, immediately after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, by a group of scholars and students affiliated with the Central European University, both in Vienna and Budapest. I would like to mention here Balázs Trencényi, my classmate from the CEU PhD program 25 years ago, and now CEU Professor of History, as the main initiator and the motor of the whole initiative. It was an attempt to open the safe, productive, and stimulating academic space of CEU to Ukrainian students and scholars. But we would not be able to continue it beyond the semester if we could not rely on benevolent involvement of hundreds of colleagues from many university centers in Europe, North America, and beyond. In April 2022, we started with 4 online courses and 130 Ukrainian students. By fall 2024, nearly 1,000 Ukrainian students have taken 40 online courses and participated in 5 on-site summer and winter schools. The IUFU avoided the simple model of a single university offering its own classroom to the Ukrainian students. From the beginning, it was built on the network of inspired scholars of Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian background who wanted to contribute intellectual and other resources to the project. It was also important that we could build a coalition of university institutions, both in Ukraine and abroad, including Imre Kertész College in Jena, Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, Ivan Franko University of Lviv, Kyiv Mohila Academy, University of Agder in Norway, and others. The IUFU model of study was very inclusive from the beginning. Many virtual classrooms were structured around the logic of the panel discussion on workshop with 2 or even 3 invited guests. It allowed students to be directly involved into the discussion and to address and rethink the existing conceptual frameworks and paradigms based on their unique experience. It also demonstrated the power and importance of intellectual pluralism in addressing complicated issues. Our students bore heavy traumas stemming from what they or their loved ones suffered. Among the organizers, we frequently debated whether our responsibility was to provide a heaven away from the terrible realities of war, to avoid triggering students, or whether we should address war openly and intensively. We were very honored and humbled to receive last October the Brown Democracy Medal from McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Pennsylvania State University. It is an important act of recognition and support for us. The award challenged us with the opportunity to address a broader audience with all the plurality of opinions that we exchanged in our IUFU community. The answer to this challenge is in the book. And with these words, I would like to pass the words to Tetiana, who will explain more about the birth of the book and the idea behind this project.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you, Adrian, and thanks for all the team of Review of Democracy for showing this book at the very opening of a very important series of conversations. That's a huge honor to us, as was the publication itself. And as for every author or editor, you are still being surprised that everyone wants to read what you write. And that's more or less the feeling, if I may put here on behalf of the whole team of, I'm talking here on behalf of the team of amazing people who contributed to this book and who made this book possible. That's why, rephrasing a bit Ostap's words that you just read, I'm humbled to be here and to represent IUFU community that authored that Cornell volume. And speaking in my own capacity, I was two people together with Guillaume who run the seminar that resulted into the series of essays. And I will now probably talk a little bit on the technical side of the book writing, at the same time talking on the IUFU pedagogy and what Invisible University for Ukraine is as the experimental pedagogical structure. So first of all, I'm also quoting from Ostap, also not from this statement. Ostap wants to put it that IUFU is an experiment, which is truly so, and we adapt and change every next semester. And that's this part of responsiveness of being, partly in you are fully in war, but at the same time, you have a freedom of thinking that no war and no other tragedy can deprive you of. And that's in this framework that our experiment develops, with questioning how far you can go and should you really go there. And that was the spirit behind the previous Invisible University pro-Ukraine winter school that I directed a year ago, that addressed the state of emergency as the key topic of whether, how much is one ready to sacrifice for military victory, which is in itself a question very painful for Ukrainian society. And that was a very beginning of a conversation that no one wanted to start, but everyone felt that it's a time. And from the spirit of this previous IUFU winter school, the idea was born that we have to write a book. And that was, in fact, 1 month before we received the Brown Democracy Medal. And we were proposed this amazing opportunity with Cornell contract. And exactly 1 month ago, I departed to Vienna to talk with some of our core students and mentors that we have to write, that all this experiment behind IUFU, that we have to revise humanities and social sciences in a way that they were not able to either predict the war, and they are unable to provide a solution. And that's on the someone who is now going through war but keeps its intellectual freedom to develop knowledge that would fit the reality in front of them. And with this idea, I came to Vienna and was proposing to students that it's time to write. And luckily, I think that was just a pure chance or lucky opportunity that at the same time we received this medal that provided us with a book contract that one can only dream of. And that's how we launched the book writing seminar. But the spirit behind the book emerged inside the IUFU community itself. It did not stem from the opportunity, it stemmed from this necessity that we all felt. And already in February 2024, we launched a book writing seminar, Guillaume and me, with some of our core students who were with the Invisible University, not as students, but rather as co-creators of the entire project. And preparing for this conversation, I was looking through my emails that I sent them a year ago. And I recalled to myself how I framed it, because well, in Invisible University, that's the environment where you have to really convince students that something that you propose is worth taking. So I was very worried when I went to students saying, like, look, we have to write a book because, well, that's not obvious. You got to convince them. And my pitch to students was that, look, there are a lot of books that are written from this expert position, and there are many people who are experts in war studies, right? Who know strategy, who know warfare industries, who know it all, right? And on the other side, there is a lot of biographical accounts, which is exactly what we need, right? But at the same time, what is missing is this essayistic corpus that would address the reasoning at the wartime, that would try to go in between those two poles of talking war as an object of studies and at the same time being completely subjective, right? Rather describing psychology of the one who is going through war. So we need to find a point in between those two poles of how to think about war from someone's position, at the same time not being fully trapped in war, because it does not deprive you from thinking. Although that's a feeling that I myself do share. And as a sentiment, that's something you can get trapped into it, that there is no more freedom left for a thought. And that was, the frame with which I tried to talk with students, and they responded to that. And that's how we started the seminar. And the thing behind the seminar is, I think there are traces of that in the book, although not that visible after editorial work and all the polishing that went into making a volume. The tension behind the seminar was that we have to somehow think about this war as if we didn't know anything about it, and as if we had a right to judge. Because, well, partly that is this democracy and war, and we have many ways how do we interpret what democracy is in the title of this volume. To my understanding, and that's mine, I'm not presenting it as the opinion of the whole team, but to my understanding is that this right that everyone who is mature and capable of writing can contribute to a discussion. And somehow going in between those poles that we don't know enough, we are not expert enough, we are not well versed into war studies, and at the same time going behind the psychological biographical accounts to provide this solid reasoning of one's understanding of particular aspects of the present war. That was our aim, and which I think we in a way reached. And since writing this book was also a part of IUFU pedagogical experience, the seminar ran for 4 months. We met weekly, and in a way, what I was scrolling through the volume this morning, and I realized there are only 2 essays that are co-authored, which is not true, because in fact all essays are co-authored. Because that was a seminar that was very intense in the discussion among the students. And that is also something about democracy that when we started, and students asked Guillaume and myself, they asked us, well, okay, but how about the audience? And we tried to convince students that their audience is the group. Because if we have to find people who have polar opinions about everything, a community of young Ukrainian intellectuals is exactly that community, that if they can convince each other about their own judgment, that's going to work for every outsider that can read the text. And that was in this community that we tried to provide students, for some of them that was their first text, right? To provide them with instruments of how to develop the argument about the things that some of them were not ready to discuss whatsoever. So, and in this mixture of, trying to get things out of oneself, it is purely psychological experience. Someone you just don't want to think about it. And in the first round, no one was going to write about death, for instance. Although in the final volume, we have several essays that are straightforwardly writing about death and about loss of home and about displacement and things like that. So, this one thing that is very hard to develop even as a biographical account that can be developed if going other way through reasoning and judgment, right? Through developing this argument step by step in front of a community of your peers whom you'd want to convince. And that's how those texts emerged through this continuous 4 months discussion among ourselves about this war and about, what do we think of it? And there are several small notes that I want to make here that we tried to focus, and that was the first task that we gave to our students, was to, instead of focusing on war, which is a questionable object in itself, we try to think of war as a process, as a transformative thing. And to understand the quality of war, we suggested to students to find a particular intellectual object and look how it was transformed. In these 2 years, it was 2 years when we started. Now it's 3, right? So instead of writing about war, we try to address the question of what war is doing to things. And from that understanding, its path and its power or whatever it is, it's transformative power. So that's how we developed. And I think now, I think we did well. The last remark that I want to make here is that since most of the authors are very young, and for most of them, this writing was transformative experience in itself. I much appreciate, and I want to thank here to all the editors from Cornell University Press who worked with us, who helped us to keep the texture, keep those particular qualities of the students' voices and mentors' voices in the book, because for most of them are not native speakers. Most of them are beginning authors. Most of them are struggling to put on paper something what you wouldn't even allow yourself to think about, right? And that this gentle editing that allowed to help, to have the whole array of possible voices in the final volume, I found, really, really amazing experience. So big thanks to our editors on this remark. And since I'm here representing a project of many people, I feel that I can excuse myself to act in a personal capacity for a second and say here that as someone who had this seminar and worked with students closely and seeing the final book done, I just want to thank to all of our students who contributed to the volume and who had the courage and passion to struggle for this several months of very intense work, and who were that fearless as to put on paper the judgments and arguments that they had. So this being something where I stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the intervention. So indeed, this book is the junction between, on the one hand, the pedagogical initiative, what Ostap was mentioning, critical thinking as well, which very clearly was explained now, and at the same time, exploration, right? Because that's another third element. Now, I would like to pass the word to one of the responders, to the first respondent, Natalie, who will address her statements and position about the book. Natalie, you have the word.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you for inviting me into this discussion. I'm going to share probably 3 things essentially. The first thing is why I think everybody should read this book, and IUFU, which means Invisible University for Ukraine, as listeners have understood, why IUFU is so beautiful and so important. And I had the chance to take part in two schools, so-called schools, winter and summer sessions in Budapest, most recently in January. And so I've seen this close up. I've met with students, I've spent time with students, I've met the incredible team and network of mentors, teachers, but everything is rather horizontal. It's very well explained in the book that we all learn and teach each other, learn from each other, including the mentors. Why it's beautiful, that's my first thought that I'll try to share. My second thing that I'll try to share is some things that jumped up at me when I read the book, and so things that I take away for myself and perhaps useful for others to hear about. And then my third point will be just putting probably my, I was a journalist for more than 30 years. I think a lot about information, and what I think IUFU and further publications could look at together with the students, together with these young brilliant Ukrainian scholars and researchers. So to jump in, and I'll actually try to be brief. Why do I think it's important? The whole exercise of this book, which is prize winning, quite rightly so, and the whole exercise, the whole effort, beautiful initiative of IUFU, because basically in times of war, which affects all of us on the continent, I'm talking as a European, a non-Ukrainian European, we need the agora. We need this agora, which is a space to listen to each other, to share information, thoughts, to have rational, fact-based, information-based discourses. And it is amazing. It is amazing and beautiful that IUFU provides this for a network of young Ukrainian people who are directly affected by this big war. And I find that admirable. I just want to say that because it's absolutely admirable to see young people who find the capacity, together with this network around them, the capacity to reflect on the very experience of war while they are being affected by that war. And I used to be a journalist in some war zones in Ichkeria, Chechnya, in the early 2000s, and in other places, and I've never encountered this capacity, not in these circumstances, to come together and reflect while the war is raging, reflect on the experience of war. And that's very much what the book is about. Now, it's admirable, but it's also useful for those of us who are non-Ukrainian and who may not live in Ukraine. I'm currently based in Ukraine, in Lviv, for several months and a long time, I hope. But for those of us who are not Ukrainian, whose families are not directly affected by this war, this book and this whole exercise of thinking and sharing together is useful. Why? Because I believe that my feeling as a European is that the experience that the Ukrainians are confronted with, struck by, is something that in fact concerns all of us, but we aren't aware of it enough. And we know that in our democracies, we have serious questions to deal with. And I think that this agora, this exercise of the agora, is something that we outside of Ukraine should take even more inspiration from. And if people who are experiencing war can think about the experience of war, share sometimes different assessments, share their differences, voice them, but in a way that makes the articulation of constructive arguments possible, not the excommunication of the other. If people who are experiencing more are able to do that, we surely, who are not directly in the theater of war, need to draw inspiration from that. Now, very quickly, basically, in a nutshell, I think the Ukrainians have things to tell us that we should listen to, which has to do with the salvation of democracy. And now, very quickly, what the things that jumped up at me, at least in the book, and this was very well explained by Tetiana. You know, talking and reflecting on war by entering that topic through things that have changed, that you think have changed, that you have watched change. And the four items that jump up at me are, and this exists throughout the book, throughout the texts. The four things that dominate in my mind this book are the notion that time has changed, the notion of time has changed, the notion of space has changed, the notion of words, literally words, the vocabulary has changed, and the notion of the gaze, how we look at things, how we observe something or are witness to something. And all of these things are very, very beautifully evoked in the book. And I'll put my nice pink glasses on to read just a few tiny quotes on time. Liana Blicharska, it's the first text in the book. She talks about the urgency, the notion of urgency, of course, in war, urgency, right? And then she says something becomes very rare and very precious, and it is this, and she describes it this way: an extra minute of thinking, an extra minute of thinking. And when I think of IUFU and this book, it's like a collection of extra minutes of thinking, you know. And Tetiana, yourself, with Guillaume in your text, I also noticed, picked up this reflection on the notion of time with very striking sentences. Our times, so meaning the times we are living through, our times last until the future is invented. And there's another sentence which jumped up at me. War does not end. It is peace that begins. Okay, so huge food for thought here. The notion of space is affected, and I'll quote Diana Vonak's text on the notion of space, because she very rightly says that geopolitics. She's from Budapest. She says, geopolitics have been completely upended by this war. Of course they have, but we didn't see it coming. We didn't see it coming as we should have. And she reflects on that, the notion of space. Katerina Usipchuk also in her text talks about space, distance. We're all following the war from our smartphones. This creates both a distance and a proximity. So space is transformed, and all these things are just, how to say, useful and valuable to have in mind and to think about. The notion of words, of vocabulary has been transformed. Words, the meaning of words, and this is very much in Olha Stasiuk's text. There's this sentence in her text. She says, "Have you noticed how different you speak, how differently you speak? Have you noticed, you who is living in the war zone, in the country experiencing war, how differently you speak?" And of course, vocabulary has changed. The word okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. What does that mean? That has a different meaning now, right? I'm okay means I'm alive, right? Or I'm doing better than many other people. The words have changed in their very meaning. There's also a great quote from Sasha Korobeinikov, who reflects on the notion of understanding. You can say many words, but will you be understood? And this is a very much a Ukrainian obsession. Are we understood? How can we be understood? How can we be heard? But not just heard, be understood by the outside world, but also by others around us. And my final little word or notion that is shaken by war, and this comes up, as I said in the book, is the notion of gaze. And Diana Vonak says, it's all too easy, she writes, it's all too easy to look, so the gaze, right? It's all too easy to look without realizing, and to look at what's happening, to look at people, but without realizing fully. And I think that as a Western European, I think this is something that we Westerners, so-called Westerners, we are looking without quite realizing. And this book and IUFU are spaces, encounters. There's a generosity in all these experiences which helps us, non-Ukrainians, Western Europeans, better realize, I believe. And a last small thought. There's a wonderful passage in Sasha Korobeynikov's text. I call it in my head the weed syndrome. Weed, and I mean weed like drugs that you smoke, okay? So he describes a scene where it's in 2015. So, 9 years before the big war, 2015, some Ukrainian students are discussing things with other European students, not Western European students, and the Ukrainian students tell their Western friends, colleagues, that the war, which started, as we know, in 2014, can very well spread. It will likely spread. It won't stay where it is. It will spread. And the Western European students joke and say, "Nah, you're over exaggerating this. You should go outside and smoke some weed. You should go outside and smoke some weed." And when I think about this passage, I just think about some of the people today who are warning about how the war and the aggression, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, full-blown aggression, can very well spread to other parts of Europe in much bigger ways than is currently the case, if Ukraine is not helped enough to push back on this aggression and to push back vigorously and successfully. And people who say this today, I'm afraid, are being told, you're exaggerating. You should just step outside and smoke some weed, right? So I think reading this book also helps us get our minds around some of today's immediate challenges, not just a reflection on the past almost three years of the big war. If I have one more minute, Adrian, can I say what I think IUFU and further publications could do beautifully also? I really think that precisely because we're looking at this younger generation, and we are looking at many transformations in the world, and I'm now thinking about the tech information, disinformation, algorithmic, you name it, revolution. I think this needs to be at the heart of our thinking about the epistemological crisis we're in, right? We are in a epistemic and epistemological crisis, I believe. And it is about what can we know? How do we know it? How do we think about our knowledge? How do we again, talking as a journalist, a former journalist, how do we collect information? How do we process information? And I think this affects not just citizens, but also, of course, academia, young academics, young scholars. It affects politics. It affects everything. It affects the environment. It affects our future. So I think this topic, which is not absent at all from IUFU, this topic could be a beautiful, especially for that young generation, a beautiful horizon to embrace and to think together about. Thanks so much for bringing me in, and I look forward to more comments and discussions. Thanks. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, we added to the scholarly initiative critical thinking, a place as an agora of a place to debate. As well, it's a reflection about the war during the war, among many other new elements. Now, I would pass the word to Professor Jan Kubik, who will have the reflection on the book.
Yes, can you hear me?
Excellent, we can
Yeah,
hear you.
I have some small issues with the internet connection. I lost it for just very brief moments. It may happen, hopefully not. So I'm first of all very grateful for this invitation. It is really a great honor. I've been always very proud of my small but very important for me association with the Invisible University, and actually also with the CEO and its Democracy Institute. So it is really wonderful to be here. I'm going to start with quoting Ostap and Balash from the introduction. At some point they write, by seeking to mediate different experiences in the face of a constant threat of death, a democratic community at war is testing the very limits of democratic theory and practice, offering a unique vantage point for those who are not at war. So it is a statement that invites us to think about the limits of democratic theory and practice. So I am also doing a lot of kind of qualitative work recently, doing textual analysis using computer techniques or counting things. So I took the manuscript, the book, and I started looking at some frequencies. The word democracy appears in the essays only once. The word war appears over 300 times. The word death appears 20 times. The word life 30 times, though. So does democratic theory totally fail in the face of war, right? Because there's not much at all explicitly about democracy. Well, let's have a look at the book, or let me share with you my thoughts when I read the book. Some essays, all of them more than once, but some even more than twice, and so on. So my first conclusion is that the dominant genre of this book is poetry, and it's a variety of styles, and it is a poetry stretched between the personal and the philosophical. So I realized at some point that there are three rather unexpected features. Three things are absent. There's nothing about religion. Religion is mentioned zero. And for anybody who knows the history of the region, will know how important religion is in various discussions, historical, sociological, political, and so on. There is very little about nation and nationalism. And there is a very ambivalent attitude towards history. And of course, this is the region of and overwhelms everything else. So there's a tension between the explicit rejection of history, for example, in the name of focusing on individual experiences, and the inability to escape thinking about history and historical, particularly about the history underpinning the present tragedy. The word history appears in the book 60 times, 17 of which are in the essay written by Tetiana and Guillaume. That is one essay that is explicitly about the history. I will say a few words about it in a moment. So the word history is usually mentioned, in the departments of history as the field of knowledge, but it is not. There are no historical arguments. There is no basically engagement in historical debates that, for example, for me, who works on the politics of history and historical memory and works on Central Europe, I think also Polish-Ukrainian relations, this conversation, this part of intellectual debates and political debates is gone. This is not happening in this book. So it is, as I said, at least at the minimum, an ambivalent attitude toward history, except for Tetiana and Guillaume. But the essay is I couldn't put it away. It is about the way you are expressing it. You're not just trying to express it. You're expressing the tremendous disappointment with history and the way that history deceives us, muddles our thinking, and then you use this phrase, and this will stay with me, history betrays us. So it's about the betrayal of history. Maybe that's the reason that it's not there. The nation, religion, history are not there, but then there's this poetry of the personal and philosophical. So what is this, that philosophy that I detect there? I think two very important things. There are more, but the two are striking to me. One is, when I was growing up in communist Poland, it was still the end tales of existentialism, right? We were reading Jean-Paul Sartre in high school, and not an official reading list, and things like that. And I suddenly was struck that it is a very existentialist book. Because, for obvious reasons, perhaps, right? It's about the existence, Kierkegaard, fear of being. Of course, you are fearful in the face of such an enormous tragedy, in the face of war and death, right? So it is this existential trope of the urgency of now. You don't have much more than that, but one thing you can be centered is for a brief, longer moment you have now. And that theme returns. The second kind of philosophical, I guess, trope theme is the nature of perception. Quite a few people, and Natalie talked about it already quite a bit, about the space, time, how they are perceived, about the gaze. It was also striking for me. I have one quote from Katerina Osipchuk. To watch the war from afar is thus to be stuck in the surface's precarity, in photographs' inability to reveal anything but the indexical, the digital traces of physical pain, right? The superficiality of something at which we at the same time feel is absolutely necessary, that the world sees it, that it doesn't become, it has to be in front of our eyes, but what is then in front of our eyes is highly imperfect, deceitful in some way, right? And then she says the most documented war is the most mediated and thereby the most distant one as well. And it's there's one of the many paradoxes that are mentioned, analyzed, described in the book. There's another sentence that struck me very, very strongly, which is, would you be so kind as to stop understanding me? This is Katya Lysenko. It is absolutely striking, right? And I think I do understand. And at the same time, it is very unnerving and upsetting. No, I want to understand you. I want to be. I think I lost you for a moment. Okay, you're back. I want to be with you, but then you're helping me to understand that I cannot understand you fully, right? I'm not. So that, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it could be called the ethics of detached involvement. You need to be involved, but know your boundaries, right? So it is the appeal to show concern, compassion, involvement, but to give up the idea that without being in it, you cannot really fully bear witness and speak with required authority, I guess, something like that. Then there's the topic of the attitude toward Russia and Russians, ambivalent. It is a struggle. It is the people, for obvious reasons, are torn between rejection, denial of the not wanting to be in any contact at the time, knowing that it is impossible. Sasha Khan writes, "Crime of war repels understanding." But what is striking is there's no hatred in that book. There are no aggressive put downs. There's no compassion either, which would be hard to ask for, but there is some complex wrestling with how to position oneself in the face of all of this. So can we then say that this book shows the failure of democratic theory, and can we say that despite of mentioning the word democracy only once, this book is about democracy? And it took me a while to realize, a few days, that it is absolutely centrally about democracy, because, and this comes from all the work I'm doing, and also from living now through the horror of the second term of the Trumpian, I don't even know how to call it, experiment. Democracy must be, as we know, democracy must be designed for all, I wrote to myself, but its vitality comes from the sensitive, thoughtful people who are capable of self-analysis, who can counterbalance the explosive emotions that they feel with calm reasoning. Democracy also calls for people who understand what it means to have, as we say, character. People who understand the significance of such old-fashioned things, it seems, as honor and dignity. And this is what I find in that book, right? So this kind of thing, we say, well, it's very hard to create and maintain democracy without democrats. I realized here we have in this university, in these young people, an amazingly effective, wonderful lab in which democratic citizens are created. In a way, it is more difficult to create democratic citizens than democratic institutions. I'm afraid this is what the lessons of the rise of right-wing populists around the world are showing. So again, yeah, this is a wonderful book. I'm so happy that I was able to spend time with it and try to form some thoughts. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the clear intervention, which again puts a different perspective from a quantitative perspective, but again with a very, very, very strong and interesting interpretation. Now we would like to ask Tetiana to respond to the follow-up or to react to the ideas being discussed, and then we will ask the public to ask some questions.
Okay, I have in fact, that's something what is how to say, that is emancipating me, this conversation, because I'm partly an editor and partly a seminar conveyor, meaning that, and I was sharing this with Adrian before we started, that I have problems reading this book because every sentence that you quoted now, I remember by heart, and I remember exact second and setting how the sentence was put on paper. that's why I struggle a lot while reading the book, because all the discussion behind every word and noun that appears now in the final volume, I remember perfectly well. And that's why I have problem distancing myself from the final text and trying to approach it as the reader. Although I put for myself two words on a paper that I want to address now, one being the complexity, the other being poetry. And I will start with complexity, because I began my talk with the previous IUFU winter school that was about the state of emergency, right? And this year's winter school that we closed just some 12 days ago was about the beginning of the war in Donbass. It was about 2014. And the key word to this school, which I was happy to direct, the key word to this was complexity. And that was something what my aim was to bring back, in fact, to the discussion of the war and its beginning. And everything was to bring back complexity to politics, domestic and international, at the same time, because especially we're now talking Trump and everything, the moment that any paper would be ever signed, this complexity will reemerge immediately. And the complexity of Ukrainian society, complexity of Ukrainian political structure, and the complexity of this war's roots would just reemerge, which was so easy to forget once Putin invaded Ukraine, February 24th. Right? And that was something that if we are approaching, and that was, I think I'm here sharing more or less a consensual opinion, that as long as we are approaching this third phase of war, at one point or another, and there is no understanding that we are getting any close to peace, but rather to the third phase, right? Understanding what was in between the first and the second phase, right? In between 2014 and 2022, this amplitude of change would be crucial for preparing yourself for the third phase of this war, whenever that comes. And this complexity of thinking was something what we started exercising while writing this book, and which I personally, I mean, I'm here in all sorts of my capacities, right? Because I mean, I'm at the same time Ukrainian activist, and the same time pedagogue, at the same time editor, etc. But now talking in my hat of Ukrainian activist, right? I was a little bit discouraged on the first half year of the full-scale invasion, that now we have an easy excuse to oversimplify. And that is very understandable excuse. That is emotionally very easy to take, right? And with all the trauma and everyone who and all the close ones whom you buried, right? That's so easy to get into oversimplification. But politically, that's a failure, regardless of what would be the military development, right? And that was, I think that was a trap from which we all, sort of saved ourselves with this book, bringing back the complexity to the debate. And then it further developed into this winter school that we had this year, discussing once again what happened in 2014, discussing where was the not only it's obviously that's Putin's war, right? But the question still remains, why did he succeed in launching it, right? How it developed, what was the role of Ukrainian oligarchy, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military in Crimea, etc. So, I mean, thinking about Ukraine at this moment, not about this patriotic phantom, but about a very particular state, very particular government, very particular institutions, the way they exist in this war, it was something so, hard to imagine some 2 years ago, and finally we are here. Finally, we are bringing back complexity to this debate, so that we are better informed how to act, right? Because that's the matter with which we deal. It's not this phantom of Ukraine, that's this very particular Ukraine with which we deal, and that's the one we want to win in this war, right? And that's the one we want to somehow reemerge sometime after, if that wins, right? So that's this complexity thing that started from the book and proved itself a good way to facilitate further debate, for the next year, and I hope later, as we continue thinking about what war is doing and what we are doing in this war. So that's one thing. And the second thing, poetry, and here I have not that much of an analytical comment, but rather something very surprising from my side as an editor of that book, that somehow there is this tenderness of thinking that remain despite of everything. And that was something what I did not expect to see in the first drafts that I received. And that somehow that's, everyone is talking about resilience, right? Every time I hear about resilience, I don't know what that means. But sometimes looking at this poetic feature of this book, I think, well, maybe that's what they mean. If that's not what they mean, then they better mean that feature, right? That's this gentleness and tenderness of thinking that is there, and it's so much about life, right? In this book where no one wants to talk about death. And yeah, that's just rather another comment to this. Thank you.
As a moderator, I would have one question to answer, and thank you a lot for the presentation and for the very well articulated ideas. Now, my question is, so we are assisting at, on one hand, there's a pedagogical initiative. There's clearly direction of inquiry, perhaps even of investigation around one cluster of people, students that might become specialists later on in few years if they are not already there. At the same time, we have a text, an essay, which we are discussing about. Now, to what extent can we discuss about an epistemic shift, a programmatic group into this regard around IUFU? And if that would be, or yes or no, it's too for us to discuss, but what questions are yet unanswered and IUFU students might discuss in the upcoming year? So as you mentioned, the complexity is back in the game, and it's a good element. Still, what questions would you see within the IUFU community? What avenues might open?
Is that the question to me or to everyone?
Again, it though goes first to the author, but again, the respondents might as well answer or provide their final reflections now.
I would much appreciate this being a conversation rather than my statement. I mean, I can easily answer the question what IUFU community is talking about, because we just closed the winter school, meaning we talked for a week, right? And I have a response sheet from everyone, and I ran several discussion groups, and this is something what I can tell you. But the question is, what do we do to prepare for the next war, right? And that is very tough question, meaning that, first of all, Ukraine still did not win, regardless of Ukraine, what Ukrainian government was saying in the first months. Second, Ukraine will lose part of its support very soon, and it is losing now, right? So that's about the sustaining the military effort. That's decreasing. At the same time, we all know that what is Putin's military capacity is there, right? And then the question that is the question for IUFU community: what can you do? when we are now talking on this purely military terms. I mean, the moment that someone in the White House and in the Kremlin decide to sign up anything, what do you do being a citizen? What do you do being, an active human being who has an opinion, who wants to contribute? But that's something about this peace process, and about this peace process, I'm putting it in quotation marks, right? There's something about this high level diplomacy that is so, and I'm getting back to our conversation theme, that is so undemocratic, right? That these negotiations will proceed regardless of what anyone thinks. And that is something very tough to digest, right? And our discussion in the last school, what is a political action in these terms? What is that? Boycott White House wouldn't work. I mean, obviously. And somehow the development of this war shifted from the level where anyone can contribute and have an opinion and have a voice, and worst case scenario is sign up for sign up for military, volunteer, support, help people move, find food, find shelter, whatever. Somehow the question of this level of acting in the war shifted to this level of high level diplomacy where it doesn't matter. And that is something what we are discussing, trying to find our place in. And that's something, I would say I have no answers myself, right? Being activist myself, being citizen myself, and not as a pedagogue or youth organizer. That's something, what can one do when somehow the level of discussion shifted to that level where only 30 people in the world have voice? Maybe 40, right? And that's also something about democracy, right? How these negotiations are formed. And that's what we are, right, learning now by experience and thinking about how to approach.
Can I jump in and perhaps to bounce off that and to share a thought about what can IUFU do, what can this community do, and I think that fighting disconnections is very important. And that's why the agora, the space, the exercise of coming together is so important, and I believe will be even more important in whatever happens, really whatever happens now. And probably dark clouds are accumulating, for our continent. And so I think that anything that brings young Ukrainian scholars, researchers, thinkers together with others, and especially, of course, in beautiful digital spaces, when it's meaningful, but especially in person, which is what the IUFU schools do. I think that's going to be absolutely essential, because I think we cannot think really deeply by being just on digital. You know what I mean? Like by just scrolling. I think scrolling is the anti-thinking. We need that beautiful extra minutes of thinking, and the scrolling does not help us do that. And we need to meet, and we need to exchange, and that's what IUFU does beautifully. So very modestly, my thought is, find even more opportunities for IUFU, even more opportunities for young Ukrainians and other Europeans and other people from beyond, to come together. And that's the kind of collective intelligence, collective energy that can help get through whatever is coming. I think it's priceless, this coming together. Yeah, I'll stop there.
If I may to add to that, I had the good fortune and privilege to be in Kiev in November and to give a lecture at the opening of the Institute for Advanced Study, and I 100% or 150% behind Natalie's idea that in-person networking and constant building of actual face-to-face contacts is absolutely critical, without neglecting, of course, what we're doing now on Zoom. But yeah, it was an amazing experience to be there, and for all kinds of reasons. But I have one thing, the data I see on the level of support for the war in Ukraine is clear that it's going down, particularly in the East. So my question for Tatiana is, do you feel this declining support outside of the network or group within which it seems the support is absolutely kind of steady? And my impression is it's very steady. Each time I interact with people from IUFU, it's like this, like, we would rather die than surrender attitude than anything else. And the second quick reflection is, having been someone who studied and somewhat participated in what was happening in Central Europe, particularly in Poland, in the 70s and the 80s, particularly the Solidarity movement, the thing that was absolutely central to not giving up and survival and eventual victory was incredibly complex network of various forms of resistance, right? And when you are asking the question, what maybe, unfortunately, this society needs to start preparing itself, is the prolonged resistance under the conditions of quite likely actually of some kind of partial occupation of at least a part of the territory. The Crimea is that situation since 2014, right? So yeah, that's the comment about like resistance, preparation. But yeah, the question is, what do you think about that declining support? Does it influence the people you work with, for example, to put simply?
I think, well, I will first comment on this flag that I have behind of me, which is here because my mother is serving in military, and because my stepfather was serving in military in 2014 back then, and that's I'm in between two networks, right? One being this people at the academia talking how they envision war, and people in the trenches talking how they see war, right? And I'm torn between those two communities. And I would say that somehow it shifted, that in the last half year, people in academia started rather talking like people in trenches, finally realizing that Ukraine cannot sustain this war on that conditions that we have right now, right? Because that was very easy to, for Ukrainian government to convince everyone in the early months of invasion that it's already won, we just have to get there, right? We just have to get on the borders, but fundamentally it's won, which was the take, right? And that took time for civilians to understand how far from reality that is, but it took 0 seconds for the military to know how far from reality that is. Right? And now we see the shift that civilians are more open to realizing something what guys in the trenches knew all the way around. Right? But that changes the meaning of the war, meaning how long of an attrition warfare are we ready for? right? Or resistance. I mean, that's two ways how one can interpret that. And I would say that also changes politically in terms of martial law exists or not, right? That's another part to this. And you know, I wouldn't say that this logic of rather dies than surrender is still prevalent. It's rather the sense of uncertainty of what do you do if not, right? If does is also not a way to freedom. How about that? Right, which is also very, I mean, outside of beautifully militant propaganda, that's the question, right? And that's the one people are slowly taking. And then many questions arise, and that's why I'm talking about this third phase of war. I recently had an argument with some of my colleagues who again wanted to have a panel on Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. And I had a hard time explaining them that we're very far away from this. You shouldn't bother getting this panel because it would rather the question of Ukraine's pre-war reconstruction, meaning pre-next war, right? And how do you prepare for another round of invasion, taking care of all the social problems, all the inequality, all the poverty, all the people displaced, all the things destroyed at the same time preparing for what might be the future invasion. So that should be rather the framing of efforts now, which is so complicated, right? And that's again about complexity, that it's taking time. And here, getting back to Liana's essay in this book, right? If there is one extra minute, we better use it wisely, right? Because we are on the clock now. It's 1 month, 2 months, half year. We don't know exactly how much time do we have, but it should be used very nicely and very wisely without spending time on delusions like post-war reconstruction. Or another thing that that's lingering from 2015, like this reconciliation with Donbass, which is no longer existent, in fact. Right? We are keep discussing something in this delusional condition of talking about reconciling with political entity that is no longer existent. And these are these things that are so hard to process. And at the same time, we have so little time to process them before we can make any wise move. Right? And that is the tension. And getting back to the book, that was this thing that we discussed with students quite a lot, that okay, you are in the wartime, you understand the necessity, and wartime, okay, that's now everyone's like wartime, but what is that? That means that first of all, you start prioritizing military effort, right? On top of what would you think be your wise political action or your political attitude or anything that all goes, after sustaining the military effort, right? And at the same time, when we start exercising what is critical thinking and discussing politics proper in the wartime, you're on that edge of either saying something what no one wants to listen to, or saying something what might undermine military effort, which is still the case. Exactly. Right? That's what Ukraine anti-corruption activists are facing. How long do you want to go with discussing corruption in Ukraine in front of your foreign partners? I mean, that's a very obvious way of putting that dilemma. And at the same time, that's the question of how you sustain the military effort without criticizing your government. There is no way. Right? So that's this dilemma that we were discussing quite a lot during the book writing process, right? Where are these limits of your intervention with the governmental policy, right? Where is this limit of how far can you criticize understanding and sharing what is the goal of the military effort, but at the same time understanding, quite rightly so, that if you don't criticize this military effort, will not be sustained. right? And this dilemma didn't go anywhere so far. As we are heading to 2025, God knows what that brings to us.
Thank you very much for the intervention. I would like to end with a quote, and it's on page 80, and it's in a way very captures in a nutshell the last part of the discussion. So on page 80, the text is called War Meets War. War happened for the first time for everyone already. It happened as a fact, as an actualized possibility of war. The actualized possibility of war is the ongoing war. We are all at war. Yet the war that is happening does not lead to the war that is fought. The latter war is not derived from the former one. People are murdered in Ukraine every day, and new heroes enter eternity, not closing doors after themselves. Many thanks for the participation, Natalie, Tetiana, Jan, and Ostap. Dear listeners, in case the arguments convinced you, there is a good news. You can freely download the book from the Cornell University Press. The link is provided on the Democracy Institute webpage and on the publisher's website. Throughout our first Book of the Month session, we discovered that the Essays on Democracy at War, it's at the same time a scholarly initiative. It's a way of proposing a new critical thinking. It's an agora, a very well needed agora of debate. It's a reflection about war during war. It reflects on the notion of democracy only by using the word democracy 2 times. At the same time, it provides new issues about and new problematizations about what history means. And on this note, we would like to thank you for for watching us. Let us keep in touch. Please subscribe if you have not done already so to our media channels and to keep in touch for our regular events. And we would like to wish you a pleasant evening.